Here's a crop Wisconsin always seems to have plenty of: rocks. You could use them to build a wall, or here's another idea. You could put them to use in the garden. Welcome to the Wisconsin Gardener. I'm your host, Shelley Ryan. On this edition of the Wisconsin Gardener, we'll learn about a special group of low-growing, large-flowered, spring-blooming perennials. They're called rock garden or alpine plants. They're versatile and hardy, perfect for Wisconsin's climate. And we'll let you in on a secret. You don't even need rocks to grow them. We'll show you what you do need. That's next on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Production of the Wisconsin Gardener is made possible in part by Jung Seed and Nursery Company, with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie. Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide. And the Aaron's Foundation, the charitable arm of the Aaron's Company, Brillion, Wisconsin, maker of lawn and garden power equipment for consumer and commercial markets worldwide.
You know, in many parts of Wisconsin, if you dig at all, you're likely to come up with some rocks. Well, here's a suggestion as to what you can do with those rocks. We're in the garden of Jack Ferrari, and Jack, tell me what you did when you discovered this in your yard.
Well, I had this great big rock that I cleared out, had a lot of honeysuckle and such around it. Cleared it out and was interested in gardening, had all these rocks, so rock gardening seemed like a natural way to go.
Well, now rock gardening plants are very special, but why? What makes them so special?
Well, they're plants that come from mountainous areas. They usually come from above the tree line, and the conditions up there are very harsh. It's windy, spring comes late, winter comes early, so they're spring bloomers.
So they're kind of ideal for Wisconsin.
They're ideal for Wisconsin, and they're very low growing. There's a columbine down there that's a lot smaller than most of the ones you're used to.
Then this is as big as it's going to get.
That's right.
It's beautiful. Now, what do I need to do to plant these? Do I have to have a rock garden then to grow these low-growing perennials?
No, you don't. There's really only two things you need to be growing rock garden plants. One of them is sun. You need to have pretty good sun. And the other is you need a soil that's pretty quick draining. You need to have a fairly lean soil.
What would that mean then?
Well, typically rock gardeners grow their plants in a mix of roughly a third soil, a third sand, and a third rock chips.
Okay, no clay then.
Right.
Okay, well now you've got just a wide variety of plants tucked in here and there.
Right, here's
this one here. It looks familiar.
That's it's a clematis.
It is.
And it's not one of those big hybrids you see all the time. This is a native species from out in the Pacific Northwest, and it's just been sprawling over this rock. It wanted to sprawl the other way, but I've trained it up here.
And I'm used to the ones that climb, you know, up the side of the house.
Right.
And this is as big as it gets again?
It'll get a little bit bigger, but not much.
So there's some really charming guys. Well, so if I don't have to have rocks, what else do I need, though, to keep these plants happy?
Well, it's nice to have a variety of aspects, and a variety of ways that the sun faces, and have things like this. This is a raised bed, and I've used some rocks to build it, and it gives me a lot of different orientation. So I have some plants that want full sun, they face the south. Some plants that want just morning sun, I've got that too. This is a little draba. It's a little spring flowering alpine.
It's charming.
Put it in there when it was a very small plant, and as you can see, it's spread out and it's now filling in the crevice quite nicely.
So that's really one of the issues of rock gardening then. Well, even if we're not using rocks, that these guys are so small, we have to do something to raise them up, or they're just going to be lost in a normal garden.
If you plant them among larger plants, you can't see them, and when they're down very low, it's hard to get down to them.
So placement is maybe as important as lean soil and full sun.
That's right, that's right.
Now what is this? This is gorgeous.
Well, this is a Daphne.
Beautiful.
Most Daphnes are 3 or 4 feet high or so.
Yeah, mine is.
This is one that's about 8 or 9 years old, and that's about as tall as it's going to get. It just gets a little bit wider each year.
Now, Daphnes are evergreens, aren't they?
They are, and that sometimes makes for problems, because this raised bed that makes it easy for us to appreciate it serves as kind of a feeding shelf for deer. And since that stays green through the winter, sometimes I get some damage on that, but it's tough enough. It always comes back.
So eye level for us and teeth level for the animals.
That's right.
Okay, now you say we don't need rocks to do these plants. What about the mulch? It's almost a gravel you've got here.
It's a pea gravel, and you can get that from almost any stone supplier. And it's good to mulch with because it keeps weeds down, and the foliage of these plants likes to rest on stone because that's the way it is in its native environment.
Okay.
If it rests on a rich soil, you get all kinds of bacterial and virus infections that we don't have to worry about when we have them on stone.
So even if we put these in a normal perennial bed, use a rock mulch.
It'd be nice to have
gravel
rock mulch, yeah.
Okay, now we've been talking about doing this without rocks. Obviously in your yard you have lots of rocks. Tell me what you've done.
Well, I have a pretty good situation here that I'm on a natural slope, and we're at the kind of the bottom end of the slope now, and what I've done over the years is I've built this garden from the original rock up to that far outcropping you see in the distance there. And I've terraced it, and I have a range of sand beds here with plants from very dry areas of the world, and then I go back to regular rock garden plants up there that I have terraced with some natural limestone rocks.
Really got a nice flow here.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that's fascinating is these plants are so small. You can plant so many varieties in one small spot.
Right.
For instance, this bed over here, you've got it, you know, crammed with all sorts of little beauties. Can you give me kind of a tour of what I'm looking at here?
Sure. Yeah, most of these plants are pretty small. They don't get very tall, and that's nice for getting a lot in a small space. But we don't want it to become too low. So it's nice to have an occasional plant that's taller.
Kind of breaks it up.
Right.
Okay.
This is a dwarf conifer that gives us a little bit of height. I have some others that are even a little bit taller. A lot of very small plants in here too. A very dwarf veronica, as you can see from last year's seed heads, doesn't get much higher than 5 or 6 inches.
It's almost a mat.
Yes, and it seeds around just a little bit.
What's the plant next to the veronica?
That's a member of the daisy family. It's called an erigeron. It's a spring bloomer. Not a very big flower, but it's kind of interesting foliage.
Okay.
I've got another columbine there. This one is pure white, stays very low, and seeds true white.
Beautiful, delicate color
Right.
to it.
Up against the rock there is a little sedum that you can see has probably been there almost 10 years and just covering quite an area.
That bright green kind of creeping.
That's right.
That's beautiful.
Little balls, little grapes. And then I have a number of different phlox cultivars in this bed, different colors. They seed around and put on quite a display.
That's great. Thanks, Jack. So you can get a lot of texture and color and variety whether you have a large garden or a very small space. We just looked at a very large rock garden. Now we're going to look at one on a little smaller scale and show you how you can start one of your own. I'm with botanist and rock gardener Olive Thompson. And Olive, you told me that what you've done here is created pockets of little rock gardens in an existing perennial bed. How did you go about doing that?
I just simply selected one of the areas of my perennial garden where I needed to do some changing. And first thing I had to do, having learned how to construct a garden, is excavate. So where I have made my little gardens, I've always taken out the soil down to about 10 or 12 inches.
Just remove it.
Yes,
Okay.
and then fill it in with rubble and rocks that I don't want to use as landscape rocks.
Okay.
And then I sort of make an edging and build up the center into a cone, and eventually do sort of a terracing job, adding rocks around as I go up.
Now you said you use rubble on the bottom and then you have landscape rocks. These are the ones, the attractive ones that you want showing?
These are the very weathered rocks from around this area. They were on top of our the soil. Here is one that has come up from deeper, and it hasn't any weathering. So when they look like this, I don't use them for decoration. I just use them as a scrap.
So they go on the bottom, and these are the ones we let show.
Bottom. And then I put together some of that soil with gravel, peat, and sand, usually in a wheelbarrow.
So you mix the sand and the peat, and this is the original soil.
Yeah.
And then the gravel.
Right.
And you just kind of,
and I
proportions?
use that to pack around the landscape rocks and make little pockets where I can plant these little plants. And by making little pockets, gives the roots a place to penetrate, and it makes little microclimates for the plants to grow in.
And with a windy site, that's probably a good idea. They need a little shelter.
Yes.
So in the soil, this is what you started out with.
That's what I started out with, and it's hard loam, probably not even topsoil.
Okay, and this is what we want to end
Yeah,
up with.
this is quite coarse, but it'll be okay. And as those, that's been some compost put in there that wasn't quite decomposed.
So basically it has to be a loose soil like this
A
to
loose soil,
provide well
yes.
drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you've told me how to start. Now let's look at one of your finished products.
Okay.
Now this is lovely. How old is this bed, Olive, that we're looking at?
This bed I began excavating for 4 years ago, but I didn't plant anything till 3 years ago. Now this year, with all the color today, I'm really happy that I must have done something right. Since I'm a primrose lover, and I have places for the other kinds of primroses, but I never had very good luck with these now. This is a Julie primrose.
It's an alpine primrose, then?
Yes,
Okay.
but it needs a crevice situation because it has creeping rootstock.
Okay.
And the fact that this and several others are in here doing well,
They're happy.
they're happy, and I am too.
Now you just basically tucked it in between these two rocks? Then?
I did.
Okay.
And this is the way alpines are supposed to be planted, so the rocks give protection and they help hold the moisture.
Okay.
So
Now, if we were planting this primrose, what type of site would we look for to properly give it the protection you're talking about?
well, actually, here's a little spot where I could put it in.
Right here?
Yes.
Okay. So you're basically almost using these walls
That's
as
right.
shelter from the wind?
That protects the
Okay.
plants.
All right, what is this?
That's a mossy saxifrage, and in my other gardening, I've had a very difficult time getting those to live. Now that one is done very well. These mossy saxifrages are threatened with our hot summer, and they die
Okay.
back quite a bit. But now I've got several plants here that are looking pretty good, and I'm going to try and keep them.
And maybe a little cooler site is making them
Yes,
happier.
and they need some shade.
And this one, this
That's
is lovely.
a primula, an alpine primula, Primula farinacea, and I've never been able to accommodate what they need before, and the fact that I have two, I'm pretty happy.
Something is going right then.
Something's going right. And the rest of the area, we don't have much color today, but I have planted things that I like either for their texture or that they will bloom later in the summer, because that's one of the challenges, is to keep some flowers going. And most of these are spring bloomers.
So we're trying to extend the interest as
trying
long as
to-
possible.
That's right, and other species will do it.
Okay, thanks, Olive.
Mhm.
Next up, we're going to look at an even smaller rock garden. You know, one of the reasons rock garden plants are so versatile is because they're so small, they can be tucked in almost anywhere. We're in the front yard garden of rock gardener Barbara Cochran. And Barbara, you've just done a wonderful job out here along the sidewalk. Tell me a little bit about what you've done.
I wanted to capture all the available growing space in my very small yard. I used concrete blocks that are 8 inches tall and sunk them half their height
Okay.
along the sidewalk edge. That stops the runoff and saves the water for me. In each individual hole, I was able to put rock garden plants that I picked up at the local nurseries.
So commonly available, but
That's right.
beautiful. What is this one here?
That's a Veronica. I'm sure you recognize Veronicas from the perennial border, the same electric blue.
But mine are taller.
That's right. Another genus that gives us small choices from otherwise tall plants is the genus Dianthus, the pinks.
Sure.
Now, many of the Dianthus are very touchable. They have a prickly but soft effect,
And it's a beautiful color too.
and they're fragrant.
Well, see, that's what I like about these little containers is you brought them up close to my fingers and to my eyes.
And it protects them from the feet
Oh,
on the
good.
sidewalk.
See, now that's you've really solved a very high traffic problem area by raising this edging up like this.
Yes. Now, each of these is an individual growing container for an individual plant,
Sure.
and no rocks. But
That's
these
true.
are rock garden
Ro-
plants.
That's true. So I can do them too.
That's right. Larger containers, like these, let us combine multiple plants and add the rocks as well.
So I don't even really need to have a yard.
No,
Just
no,
maybe a spot on the patio for something like this. This
to
is
give
pretty
it a
portable.
try. Yep.
Okay. Well, now you said this is a concrete container.
It's called a trough in reference to the fact that in England in about the 1900s, the stone troughs that were used for watering and feeding the cattle were being discarded. The rock gardeners snapped them up as quick as they could.
So, oh, great containers here.
Yes, yes.
So are we looking at an old trough then? Or?
No, this is handmade. It's a modified concrete mix.
So this is something I could do.
Sure.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you've got in this one. Some of this is just, I don't recognize this at all. This is beautiful.
That's Lewisia, named for Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And those flowers are honoring us today. They don't always open. It has to be fairly bright.
Beautiful. We're lucky then. Now this I do recognize as a hens and chicks.
Sure, and it's making its little chicks all around the edges.
It'll just keep spreading.
Mm-hmm.
And what is this? It's beautiful.
Shocking pink. This
Yeah.
is the genus Androsaceae. It's related to Primula.
See, again and again, we see plants that are miniature versions of fairly common garden perennials.
Of course, you must recognize this.
Well, the leaves look like coral bells, but the color of the flower isn't right.
It is. It's a coral bell. It's not showy, but it's very fragrant. They smell like honey.
Beautiful. Now, is that an issue as far as size of the plant? Or we have to be careful as how small these things are?
The container allows us to grow more of the small plants in a same
small
amount of space, and it also protects them from the intruders in the larger garden.
Now, are we looking at rock garden plants the same size as we'd see in an open rock garden? Or are
No.
these even, they're smaller?
No. This guy right here, now he's your normal rock garden size plant, and
Okay.
he doesn't belong here.
Uh-oh.
This is a mistake on my part. It's an alyssum I grew from seed. I didn't know it was going to get this big, and it's yet to bloom. That will be the day I decide if I keep it or not.
If it stays or goes.
Yes.
Now, this is obviously at a better scale than it fits in the
It's
container.
perfect for the trough. It's a perfect rock garden plant. It's called saxifraga, means rock break.
Okay.
And these are the silver saxifrages from the little silver encrustations on the edges of the leaves.
The leaves all look like they've been dipped in frost almost.
Right.
Beautiful. Now, how do you use these containers then?
The containers allow us to modify the soil. If not, all the plants are going to want the same kind of soil mix.
Oh, that's true, like a desert
A
plant.
desert plant is going to want drier conditions. An acid-loving plant is going to want peat for its soil mix.
So you look at each individual container as a separate plant community then?
That's right. And I decide based on the plants that I'm putting in that container.
What's the standard soil for these? Is it the same as an
It's-
open rock garden?
That's right. The drainage is no problem here. It's equal parts sand and soil and organic matter.
Okay. And then I notice you actually have a black rock as your mulch on this one.
That's the other advantage to gardening in containers. We can vary the rocks, and the mulch then you want to always match the rocks that you've used.
So each one of these becomes a completely different garden.
Sure,
That's a great idea.
sure.
Thanks, Barbara. And next up, we'll show you how to create your own rock garden container. We've shown you how you can use rock garden troughs in your backyard. Now we'll show you how you can make your own rock garden container. I'm with Ed Glover, and Ed is a member of the North American Rock Garden Society. And Ed, you make a lot of these troughs. Is there fancy equipment needed or a fancy recipe?
Not at all, Shelley. The equipment you need is very simple, things that almost everybody has around their home shop or in their garden shed. And the recipe is equal parts of perlite,
Okay.
peat moss, and Portland cement.
That's easy enough.
Right, and then you just add a small handful of these concrete reinforcement fibers
Now what
to
are
your
those?
mix. That adds strength to your trough so they can withstand the Wisconsin winters.
It's the freezing and thawing and all
That's
that
right.
stuff.
Those reinforcement fibers will link together and stop cracks in the concrete.
Are those readily available? Or?
They're available at most concrete supply stores.
Okay, the only thing we might have to look around
That's
for
right.
that.
Everything else is available very easily.
Well, you said equal parts, so about how much do we need to make
Well,
what
to
we're
build
doing
a
today?
small trough, I usually use a half-gallon ice cream container, and I use 2 containerfuls of each one of the materials and,
scoops.
and a small handful of fibers.
Okay,
That's
and
all
when
it takes.
we mix it together,
That's right. Mix the dry ingredients, and then
Okay.
you add just enough water.
how much is enough?
Now, how much is so that when you make a ball, it'll hold together, and when you squeeze it, you just get a few drops of water come out.
That's enough then.
That's just right.
I notice you're wearing gloves.
Right. The Portland cement is very caustic, and you could burn your hands by prolonged contact.
Okay. So we've mixed it perfectly, and I'm assuming if we get it maybe too wet, we could add a little bit more of the materials in to...
Right, or if it's too dry, you add a little more water.
Okay.
No problem.
So we've got it perfect. Now what do we do with it?
Okay, now you just need to decide what shape and size you'd like your trough to be.
The container.
Right, and
Okay.
they're very simple to find containers. Here's I made one from a flower pot.
Okay.
You can use a feed pan from a farm supply store.
So basically kind of look around in our garage
Right,
even.
or even
Okay.
easier, look under your sink. A dish pan makes a dandy form for a trough.
Sure.
Just right for a small number of plants and very easy to make.
Now you've lined this with plastic? Or?
Right, this is just a thin plastic garbage bag, and that'll make it easier to unmold when we're all done.
Okay, and what do we do now?
No, now we just need to add the mix to our mold.
So we're just packing it by hand.
Pack it by hand and just get a nice smooth texture here.
How thick?
About 1 inch to 1.5 inches thick for a trough this size.
Okay.
That'll make it plenty strong.
Thicker if it's a bigger container? Then?
Right.
They need, don't we need drainage for rock garden plants?
We sure do. So what we do now is we just stick some dowels in here, work
Okay.
them down through and pack the material around. And we'll just leave those in until it hardens, and when you pull them out, you'll have a drainage hole
pulls.
in the bottom.
Now you pack the bottom first and then work up the
And
sides?
then we'll just work up the sides.
So we would do this all at once?
That's right.
Okay. And then we let it harden and we're finished with
Right.
it? Or?
What we want to do now is wrap this
Okay.
plastic around, and then we'll stick the whole form inside a plastic garbage bag.
Okay.
And then set this in your garage where it's, say, 50 or 60 degrees, and just leave it.
Why?
Well, we need to let the cement harden.
Okay.
Okay. And it'll take 24 to 72 hours.
So we just pick a number of hours that's good for us, or is
Well,
there a test?
The way I do this is every 24 hours I try to scratch it. And when it doesn't scratch with your fingernail, it's hard enough to work with.
Okay. So then what would we do?
Well, the next step is to unmold your trough. We've
Okay.
tested this one. It's strong enough. And so we're just going to unmold it from the form.
Would you take the dowels out, or?
Yeah, I would take one of these out.
Okay.
Take all of them out first.
Okay.
And that'll give you your drainage holes.
Okay.
And now we'll just turn it upside down,
Okay.
pull the plastic off.
Now it's not that heavy either, is it?
No, the perlite and peat moss make it very light.
Okay.
Now the problem you'll see is that this is very smooth, has that new concrete finish to it.
It looks very artificial.
Yeah, it's not going to look nice in your garden at all. So the next step is to look on your workbench and see what you can find to rough it up and give it a textured look. And I like a wire brush or a dandelion digger, anything that'll give it a rough finish.
So we're kind of weathering it artificially.
Right, and we can also eliminate any plastic bag marks that are on there too.
Oh, sure, the wrinkles.
Right, and this will make it look good when it sits in your garden.
Now, is the concrete hard enough now that we are finished and we could be planting?
No,
or?
this is just the first curing. What we need
okay.
to do now is to spray this with a little water.
After we're done roughing it?
Right.
Okay.
Put it back inside our plastic garbage bag.
In the container or just the bag?
No, by itself.
Okay.
In the garbage bag, set it in a corner of your garage, and leave it there for at least 1 week.
Now, why are we doing this?
That allows the concrete to harden up even more and give it strength.
So that's the curing you're
That's right.
talking about.
And if you have a little patience, leave it for 3 or 4 weeks, and it'll be about 25% stronger.
And that's that strength we need with our winters again.
That's right.
Okay, so we've let it cure for 3 or 4 weeks. What else?
One more step.
Okay.
But this is an easy one.
Okay.
Now you just take your completed trough, set it out in your garden,
Out of the plastic bag.
out of the bag, set it out in the garden and leave it exposed to the elements, let it get rained on and sunshine, and leave that for about 2 months.
And it's not planted at this point.
Nope. And what that will do is leach out all the caustic material from the Portland cement, which would be harmful to your plants.
So let it just sit out there and kind of age for a couple
That's right.
months.
That's right.
Now you've got a variety of containers here. In fact, you've got one planted, and these are already starting to weather.
That's right. You can see that some of them look a little better already.
Yeah, they start to look old and more rustic.
That's right.
Well, this would be a great Saturday project.
Sure is. Invite a couple of your friends over and take turns mixing and building, and you'll soon have miniature rock gardens.
Thanks, Ed. And here's an even smaller one. You can use leftover material to make something like this. Well, are you ready to start planting your rock garden? You'll need full sun and well-drained soil. And an elevated site is recommended so these little beauties aren't lost among taller perennials. You don't have to have rocks, but they can certainly add interest to your garden. And don't forget foliage either. Foliage is what ties any garden together. Greenery adds texture and helps keep your garden interesting even if nothing at all is in bloom. You can learn more about rock garden plants by visiting public rock gardens. Allen Centennial Gardens on the UW-Madison campus has a superb rock garden. It will give you lots of ideas. They're open to the public from dawn to dusk year-round. Well, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Production of the Wisconsin Gardener was made possible in part by Jung's Seed and Nursery Company, with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie. Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide. And the Ahrens Foundation, the charitable arm of the Ahrens Company, Brillion, Wisconsin, maker of lawn and garden power equipment for consumer and commercial markets worldwide.